Good morning, what's up? My name is Luke. I'm TwinSauce. Well, I'm one of the halves of TwinSauce. My brother's at work, so it's just gonna be me today. We're gonna be talking about something that I'm very passionate about, which is indoor plants. I'm sorry, I filmed this video like more than 17 times and I'm so exhausted. I ramble a lot because I really love this topic. This topic is something I'm very passionate about, and so I have a lot to say on the matter, but I'm trying to keep it concise and brief, and so I keep restarting. So, prayerfully this is the time that it takes and then I don't restart again. I'm gonna try not to restart. Nope, this is it. I'm not restarting it again. So, without further ado, here are my top 7 tips for indoor plant care. Let's go. First tip, lighting. This is very different and it depends on your space. It depends on your house, your environment, your location. Therefore, knowing your plants and knowing where they need to be is essential. If you buy a plant and it says it's a low light plant, put it a little further away from the window so it is a low light, but it's still getting direct sunlight. If it's a high indirect plant, put it near a window, but not so close that it's getting direct sunlight because it can burn the leaves. If it does need direct sunlight, put it in the window. That's kind of just basic, but it is hard when your space determines what kind of plants you can have. But if you let yourself think that way, get creative with low light plants, because if you don't have a ton of light or you have too much light, figure out the best low light plants that don't need a ton of light and figure out how to make those work with your space and your aesthetic. That's just my recommendation. The second point I want to talk about is container size. This is a fairly basic thing that I don't think I realized until I killed some plants because I put them in too big of pots. But if you increase the pot size of a plant too drastically, they don't really know where to go. And I don't know why this is, because you can plant these same plants in the ground and they seem to be okay, but for some reason in house plants it doesn't work this way. But if you, a good rule of thumb, we'll say this, is if you're planting like a 5-inch pot, to go to an 8-inch pot can almost be too much. So you go to 5 to 6 and then 6 to 8 is a little bit better to let those plants adapt to the plant size. They like to be tight, they like to be snug. So going too big will almost overwhelm them and put them in a state of shock, and then it can kill them if they can't learn to adjust. Good rule of thumb, don't go more than 2 inches bigger than the pot that the plant is already in. Can you stop? The next thing we're going to talk about is potting soil. This is actually something that I made a mistake of myself, and I'm bringing this to you to hope that you don't make the same mistake. When you go to the garden center, it can be very overwhelming. If you go to Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever you go to get your plant stuff, it can be a little bit overwhelming to see all of these different kinds of soil that look the same. The bags all look the same. But if you pay a little bit of attention, which I didn't do, it's important to get potting soil instead of gardening soil. It can look similar in the bag, it can have similar actual logos on the bag, but look and read and make sure you're getting potting soil. Potting soil has fertilizers and nutrients in the soil that can help your indoor plants thrive. The same way, gardening soil doesn't usually have that inside it instilled. So it'll actually hurt indoor plants to put them in gardening soil, whereas they need the potting soil to succeed. That's just a quick tip. The fourth thing we're going to talk about is watering. This is a huge part because I know a lot of people say that this is an intimidating part of indoor plants. They're afraid they're going to overwater, underwater, or not water at all for fear that they're going to kill the plant or drown it or do something. So it's important, again, to know your plant and to know how often and how much to water your plant. That's kind of what it comes down to. Often, like frequency and amount. Many of the plants that I own, I water once a week, a generous amount. That's not a very direct or for sure answer for you, but I like to do them weekly. I usually do it on Wednesdays, and I usually do it so that I cover the soil so it's very, the water, it looks very wet and damp. And then I like to see drainage come out the bottom if possible. That works for most of my plants, whereas some of my plants, like my snake plant and my fern, I only water every other week or once a month. So it just depends on the plant and learning to know those plants and how much to water them. It should say on the actual tag of the plant when you buy it how much to water, but then also make sure that you're not just believing that and following that directly. Watch the plant and figure out if it needs it more frequently or maybe some more water than it said, because sometimes your environment plays a huge part of that as well, and when you water them too much or too little and it's not having as much evaporation or it has too much humidity, that could play into it too. So make sure you're watching your plants, you're getting to know them, and you're looking for signs and symptoms of underwatering or overwatering, and that way you can kind of adjust your watering habits to fit each individual plant. It's just like feeding a dog or a cat, you know? You're just learning what you need to do to make sure that they're happy and healthy. The fifth thing we're gonna talk about is fertilizer. I use plant food, too. I use this Osmocote, so I kind of put these in the same thing, but you can get fertilizer from different plant stores as well. It's important to do that. Some people do it like right in the springtime, and then they'll do that, it'll last like 4 months. It should say in the bottle how much it's gonna last. I only do it like once a year, and my plants seem to be going crazy, and so I don't know if there's other rules. I feel like this is an area that I don't know that much about, but I wanted to add it because I wanted to add plant food and fertilizer to this list because it is important. It's something that a lot of people don't think about. They do need to be getting nutrients. They do need to be getting some other things that they can't get because they're not outside. And so adding the fertilizer and plant food can help them thrive in your environment. The sixth thing I want to talk about is increasing humidity while decreasing drafts. This is something that I don't do good at, and I was doing some research before this video to see if I was missing anything. And I think that my apartment is fairly drafty, 1, and 2, it's fairly humid. So I do have the humidity aspect, which is good, so I don't do some of these tips, but it's also very drafty. So I just because it's getting kind of cold, I moved all my plants away from the windows because they're kind of drafty and I didn't want them to have drafts. And I also kind of was monitoring the humidity in our house. So our apartment. There are ways to do this. Misting plants is a myth. It doesn't really increase humidity, and it really only does it for about 6 hours. You need to be increasing the humidity for an overall, like the majority of the plant's life if they need more humidity. Ways to do this are fairly simple. You can get a plate or like a larger plate than the bottom of the pot, fill it with rocks and water, and then just sit the plant on top of that plate with the rocks. What this does is it allows it to evaporate and increase the humidity around that plant. That's an easy, simple way to do that. You can also buy humidifiers, but sometimes that can get a little sticky for the people in the house, and that can be a little bit annoying. On the topic of decreasing drafts, like I said, I moved all my plants away from the windows. It's not just window drafts that are a problem. It's also like heating drafts. I don't know why I'm pointing, you can't see, but there's also like heating drafts that like if they're near a vent and things, that's pushing a lot of dust and different gross particles into the plant's life and their space that they're like feeding on. And so it's very, very important to kind of move them away from different vents and heaters and different things that might be just blowing on them. Sometimes it's not terrible, but in my experience, I've usually moved mine far away from those areas and had them in more indirect light. But yeah, it kind of comes down to your space. There's a lot of factors that have to do with space, but removing them from those different venti areas can help your plant thrive. And last but not least, we're going to talk about pruning, or like keeping foliage clean. In the life of a plant, leaves will die. There are things that are going to die and things that are going to get sickly. It's important to know that you can trim those. Trimming is vital because until they're trimmed or until they fall off, the plant is still putting a lot of energy into fixing or healing that leaf instead of creating new growth or foliage. So with my basil, I just went through and I pruned it a bunch because he had not been watered in a while. I was gone on a business trip. I came back and I was like, oh my gosh, my roommate didn't water you. Well, my brother didn't water you while I was gone. Well, he did water him. He just didn't water him as much as he probably needed to, and that's really okay. It's nothing against my brother, but it just needed a little bit more water. So I had to prune him. But now, after he's pruned, he's starting to look better. Even today, that was yesterday that we filmed that footage. But he's starting to look better today, and hopefully that it continues to do well. But by pruning, the plant starts putting less energy into those leaves that are actually dying and actively going to fall off, and there's nothing that can really be fixed in those leaves. And it also allows them to grow new ones and put that energy toward new growth instead of fixing old growth. So that's my tips for growing plants. So in closing, make sure the 3 things that I want you to, not all 7 are necessarily essentially vital for they're just basic knowledge things you can find out on Google. But really the biggest 2 factors that I found, or 3 factors that I found, help the life of a plant the most and help them thrive in your space is to know the kind of plants that you can have in your house and get those plants. Know your light, know your area, know your humidity, know that those environment factors are huge, especially with light. Get things that work well in your space, and then also water them correctly. But when I say correctly, I mean learn them. Water them, what it says on the package, whatever they say, whatever the tag says when you get it, but then learn them. It's just like a pet. You got to pay attention to it, you got to feed it, you got to water it. And yeah, last but not least, plant food is so important in fertilizer. If you like this video, give me a huge thumbs up. If you love plants, give me a huge thumbs up. Give me any tips or recommendations that you have in the description below. The comments below. I'm always learning and I always want to learn more. So if you have any tips that you think that would help me in the life of my plants, I would love to hear from you. So thank you so much for watching. That's it. Subscribe if you liked this video, and we'll see you with another video real soon. Don't die. Okay, bye.